trade deals between the two partners.
Well, that's okay. That's what he should be doing. I mean, it's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that.
Imagine this, January 20th, 2026. The Swiss Alps tower over Davos as the world's most powerful leaders gather for the World Economic Forum. In that glittering hall, a Canadian Prime Minister is about to do something unprecedented, something that will trigger the most dangerous economic showdown between allies in modern history. Mark Carney stands at the podium, looks directly at where Donald Trump is sitting, and delivers a speech that makes headlines worldwide. We've been living within a lie. The rules-based international order is dead. Trump's response, 100% tariffs, threats of annexation, economic warfare. This isn't just a trade dispute. This is the moment the entire global power structure started cracking, and what happens next will affect every single person watching this video. Stay with me because what I'm about to show you isn't just about Canada or America. It's about what happens when the world superpower stops playing by its own rules. Let me take you inside that room in Davos. Carney didn't start with pleasantries. He started with a story about Václav Havel, the Czech playwright turned president who fought Soviet oppression. Havel once wrote about a greengrocer in communist Czechoslovakia who hung a sign every morning, "Workers of the world, unite." Nobody believed it, but everyone performed the ritual, sustaining a broken system through collective pretense. Havel called it living within a lie, and Carney looked at that global audience, the billionaires, the presidents, the CEOs, and said, "We've been living within a lie about the international order." The room went silent. What followed was 30 minutes of the most direct criticism of American policy that any Allied leader has delivered in modern history. Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, Carney declared, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. He didn't name Trump. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. And then Carney said the line that changed everything: middle powers must act together, because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu.
The middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But I'd also say that great powers can afford for now to go it alone. They have the market size, the military capacity, and the leverage to dictate terms. Middle powers do not. But when we only negotiate bilaterally with a hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what's offered. We compete with each other to be the most accommodating. This is not sovereignty. It's the performance of sovereignty while accepting subordination. In a world of great power rivalry, the countries in between have a choice: compete with each other for favor, or to combine to create a third path with impact. We shouldn't allow the rise of hard power to blind us to the fact that the power of legitimacy, integrity, and rules will remain strong if we choose to wield them together.
The audience erupted, standing ovation. Leaders from around the world rushed to congratulate him. Former UN ambassadors called it courageous, visionary, long overdue, but in Washington, Trump was furious. Here's what most people don't know. 9 days before that Davos speech, Carney did something that would give Trump all the ammunition he needed.
Today, to announce that Canada and China have reached a preliminary but landmark trade agreement to remove trade barriers and reduce tariffs to the levels of Chinese automobiles as a cap that we had 2 years ago, okay? Secondly, just to reinforce, that's less than 3% of the Canadian auto sector. Fundamentally, stand up for human rights, we stand up for democracy, territorial integrity, rights to self-determination. We take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. That means the following. We do engage with countries. We calibrate that engagement depending on our values and our interests, so that engagement is more narrow. when there are those issues.
Mark Carney traveled to Beijing, the first visit by a Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017, and when he sat down with President Xi Jinping, they struck a deal that would send shockwaves through Washington. The deal: Canada would reduce tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to 6.1%. A cap of 49,000 Chinese EVs per year could enter Canada. In exchange, China would slash tariffs on Canadian canola, pork, and seafood from crushing rates down to approximately 15%. To Carney, this was pragmatic. Canada had imposed those massive 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs in solidarity with the United States, but America wasn't reciprocating. American tariffs were crushing Canadian industries, 35% on agriculture, steel, aluminum, lumber. Canadian farmers were hemorrhaging money, so Carney looked for alternatives, and China offered something America no longer did: predictability. Let that sink in. Canada's Prime Minister went on record saying Communist China had become a more predictable trading partner than the United States of America. Within 24 hours of the Davos speech, Trump took to Truth Social with a message dripping with rage. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. But he wasn't done. Trump threatened Canada with 100% tariffs, not 10%, not 25%, 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods entering the United States if Carney pursued a comprehensive trade deal with Beijing. If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken. Trump's social media post screenshot needed, notice the language, Governor Carney, not Prime Minister, because Trump has spent months publicly suggesting Canada should become America's 51st state, posting doctored maps showing Canada absorbed into U.S. territory. Image reference: Trump 51st state map. This isn't normal diplomatic tension. This is the kind of language empires use toward colonies, the kind of threats hegemons deploy against vassals. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on Fox News claiming Carney had very aggressively walked back his Davos remarks during a phone call with Trump, that the Canadian Prime Minister had gotten scared, retreated, apologized. Carney's response: he literally rolled his eyes. Cameras caught it as he arrived for a cabinet meeting in Ottawa. To be absolutely clear, Carney told reporters, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. He explained he'd spoken with Trump for 30 minutes, outlined Canada's plan to sign 12 new trade deals across 4 continents in 6 months, and made clear Canada's intention to diversify away from American dependence. I explained to him what we're doing, Carney said, and he was impressed. Whether Trump was actually impressed is debatable. What's undeniable? Carney refused to back down, refused to perform the ritual of submission, refused to put the sign back in the window. Here's what's actually happening beneath the rhetoric. Canada is frantically trying to reduce its terrifying dependence on the United States. 75% of Canadian exports go to America. That's not a partnership. That's a vulnerability. And when that partner starts treating trade as a weapon rather than mutual benefit, you're not trading, you're hostage. So Canada is moving fast. Trade deals with Indonesia and Ecuador, signed investment agreements with UAE, locked in negotiations, relaunched with India after years of freeze talks opening with Thailand, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, and Tyre, Mercosur bloc, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. Carney has set an impossible goal: double Canada's non-US exports within a decade. Most economists call it impossible, but the alternative, remaining completely dependent on an increasingly unpredictable hegemon, is worse. Here's what the mainstream media isn't telling you: Canada isn't alone. European leaders watched Carney's speech with recognition. They're facing the same impossible choices. Trump has threatened to acquire Greenland the hard way. He suggested Denmark should just hand it over. He's trolled NATO allies on social media. The European Union is rushing to sign trade deals with everyone from India to the Mercosur countries, not because they suddenly discovered the virtues of trade diversification, but because they're terrified that the American security and economic umbrella they've relied on for 80 years is closing. Japan, South Korea, Australia, traditional American allies across the Pacific, are having quiet conversations about strategic autonomy, about what happens when Washington's commitments become conditional. All of this, the speeches, the trade deals, the threats, is prologue. The real confrontation is coming in July 1st, 2026. Mark your calendars. That's when the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, the trade pact that replaced NAFTA, comes up for mandatory review. All three countries must decide whether to extend it for another 16 years. This agreement is the backbone of North American competitiveness. It governs $1.3 trillion in annual trade. It's why most Canadian and Mexican goods still enter U.S. markets tariff-free, despite Trump's various threats. But Trump has made clear he views USMCA with contempt. "I don't really care about it," he said recently. His trade representative has sent signals the U.S. might seek to withdraw entirely, replacing the multilateral agreement with separate bilateral deals where American leverage would be even more overwhelming. Canada enters these negotiations from maximum vulnerability. The economy is already showing strain. Growth projections keep getting revised downward. Export numbers to the U.S. are declining. And here's the cruel mathematics. Canada depends on the U.S. far more than the reverse. 75% of Canadian exports go to America, but Canada represents only about 18% of U.S. imports. That asymmetry is leverage, and Trump knows how to weaponize leverage. So what will Trump demand in July? Probably greater access to Canadian resources, water, minerals, energy, at favorable prices, restrictions on Canada's ability to sign trade deals with anyone Trump doesn't approve, commitments to spend more on defense, particularly in the Arctic language that effectively gives Washington veto power over Canadian foreign policy. And Canada will face an impossible choice: accept subordination and maintain U.S. market access, or refuse, risk catastrophic tariffs, and watch the economy implode. Is Carney right about the world order? Has something fundamental actually changed? For 80 years, the United States has been what political scientists call a reluctant hegemon. Dominant, yes, powerful beyond measure, but also constrained by rules it largely wrote. America created international institutions, the UN, World Bank, IMF, NATO, and then subjected itself to them. Not out of altruism, but calculated self-interest, because predictable rules benefited everyone, including the rulemaker. That system made America's allies feel safe. If you followed the rules, you were protected. If you integrated your economy with America's, you shared in prosperity. But something has changed in Trump's second term. The reluctance is gone. The self-imposed constraints are being stripped away one by one. And allies are realizing their security and prosperity now depend not on rules, but on the mood of one man in the White House. When Trump threatens to seize Greenland by force, Greenland, which belongs to Denmark, a founding NATO member, he's not just engaging in bluster. He's telegraphing that Article 5 of the NATO treaty means nothing if the attacker is America itself. So where does this end? I see three scenarios. Scenario 1, Trump wins. The USMCA negotiations in July are brutal. Trump demands concessions that effectively transform Canada into an economic dependency. Canada remains overwhelmingly dependent on U.S. markets. Diversification turns out to be mostly symbolic. Canada signs whatever Washington demands. The template is established for every other middle power. align with America on American terms, or face economic obliteration. Scenario 2, Carney's gamble pays off. Canada's diversification shows enough progress. Those new trade deals start generating real economic activity. Non-US markets become genuinely viable alternatives. Carney has leverage. He can say no to the worst American demands. Middle powers successfully coordinate. Enough countries simultaneously reduce dependence on American markets that Washington's leverage diminishes. A genuine multipolar order emerges through collective action. Scenario 3, complete rupture. The July negotiations fail catastrophically. Trump imposes those 100% tariffs. Canada retaliates. The world's longest undefended border becomes an economic war zone. The integrated North American supply chain collapses. Both economies suffer, but Canada suffers more. This triggers a global realignment as every middle power rushes to pick sides in a fragmenting world order. History will remember January 20th, 2026 as a hinge point, the day when a leader finally said the quiet part out loud, when someone looked at the most powerful nation on earth and said, "Your rules don't work anymore. Your system is failing, and we're going to find another way." Whether that courage gets remembered as visionary or suicidal depends entirely on what happens in July, because when middle powers decide they're not on the menu anymore, when they demand a seat at the table, when they refuse to be subordinated, when they build their own coalitions, everything changes. Power structures that seemed permanent suddenly look vulnerable. Rules that seemed dead might get revived through collective insistence. A world dominated by one superpower might fracture into genuine multipolarity, or the hegemon might simply crush the rebellion before it starts, impose economic pain so severe that everyone falls back in line, demonstrate that resistance is futile, that attempting independence only brings ruin. That's the gamble Carney has made, not just for Canada, but for every country watching to see if standing up to American power is survivable. The next 6 months will give us the answer. If understanding the real stakes behind the headlines matters to you, smash that like button and subscribe, because this story is far from over. It's barely begun. Drop a comment. Do you think middle powers can actually coordinate effectively? Or is Trump's divide and conquer strategy too powerful to overcome? Are we witnessing the birth of a new world order, or just the death throes of the old one? The answer matters, not just for Canada or America, but for everyone trying to figure out what kind of world we're going to live in. I'll see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay engaged.